For me personally, one of the biggest releases in GraphQL world this year was GraphiQL 2. For years, we had to work with GraphiQL 1, which is looking like it's coming from the Stone Age. But with GraphiQL 2, the team behind GraphiQL has really outdone themselves. They've created a better version of GraphiQL that looks like it's actually from modern day. In this video, I'll be going over the differences with GraphiQL 1, and I also will be showing all the new things that GraphiQL 2 can do for you. So if you're still working with GraphiQL 1 in your project, make sure to try and upgrade it to GraphiQL 2, so you can use these features as well. So let's compare GraphiQL 1 and GraphiQL 2. But first, let's go to GraphiQL 2. You can already see how much cooler it is. If you look at the whole feeling, the whole UI, it just feels like a tool you really want to use. If you start scrolling a bit, you can see the docs page would have an upgrade. You can still click on all the individual queries, on the return types of the queries. There is actually some button to show you the history of the queries. And we'll be using this later. And one of the coolest new additions is you can actually switch from light mode to dark mode or use your system's default. And we can also clear data in case there's any old data in there. So from the get-go, it already looks way more modern than what we had before, because let me quickly go here and promise me you won't be crying. This is GraphiQL 1. And as you can see, it just feels old. There's gradients in there. Everything is gray. It looks really, really old. You would go to the docs. You can see, well, it just looks old. You go to settings. There isn't even a way to turn off light and dark mode. And I guess today, to determine if your tool is modern or not, there should be a toggle to go from light to dark mode or the other way around. So now we've looked at GraphiQL 1 and 2 side by side. Let's look at all the new updates that GraphiQL 2 has for features that GraphiQL 1 already had. If we go to GraphiQL 1, you can see we have this docs tab, which is still there in GraphiQL 2. So this docs is still there. You can still click on all the individual queries. You can find the types or the responses. This is something that's already there in GraphiQL 1. If we would go to GraphiQL 2, you can see it's still there. So we have this overview of all queries. We have response types in there. So this is pretty much still the same. We also have our history tab, which we already had in GraphiQL 1. In GraphiQL 1, we already had this history tab. So if we would be trying out any of the queries, like a query called, it doesn't really matter, so to get posts, get like an ID and a title. So this is a query in GraphiQL 1. You can see it's been added to our history, and we can actually reuse this query. If we would go, we could actually copy paste it and bring this query over to GraphiQL 1. Paste it here, we can execute it, and it will be added to the history. So not much has changed here. We still have the auto-completion in case you want to add new fields, like the body. You can see the auto-completion is there, as we already had auto-completion in a previous version of GraphiQL. But again, it just looks way more modern. We still have the update function to actually prettify the query, as we already had this function in GraphiQL 1. We still have ways to pass variables. So we would want to pass a variable here. So let's say we change this query from getPost to get a specific post that needs an ID of 1. This will give me the post, but we will make it a named query. We named query getPost by ID. You can define it. We have a variable called ID, which is a string. And then in here, of course, this should be ID. And then down here, let's say ID is string 1. Oh, we actually should be making this ID, which is confusing as both are actually strings. So this is a named query with variables in GraphiQL 2. As I said before, everything looks really clean, looks really modern. You can try and prettify, it doesn't really matter. We can also copy the query. So let's copy the query and go to GraphiQL 1 and see what happens. Copy this query. You can see we still have this part. So we have our named query, we have a definition of a variable, and then we have the query itself. And of course, we would need to set the ID variable here. ID. And then this would have value 1. And this of course still works. Except there is no button here to copy the query in GraphiQL 1, which is kind of shitty because it's actually useful. But then again, we're all developers, we know how the keyboards work, so we can just use Ctrl-C and we should be copy-pasted now. Similar to how we had request headers in GraphiQL 1. Let's say you want to pass a, I don't know, just call my header. And this is some bullshit header value. And then if we would go to GraphiQL 2, which is the newest one, we can still use these same headers to pass any header value to our query, which actually wouldn't affect the query as this GraphQL API doesn't take any headers. So these are all the same. So I quickly showed you how GraphiQL 1 and 2 compare and how they actually have an overlap of features. But besides creating the already existing features of GraphiQL 1, the team behind GraphiQL already created new features based on community demand. If we would be going back to GraphiQL 2, you can see there are some new features. I already showed you the dark mode, which we now have. We can actually turn it back on to use the pretty dark mode. So this is a new feature. Also a new feature is this data clearing. And it works pretty similar to how you would clear your data in your network tab. So you actually have to refresh in order to see the updated or actually the cleared data. As you can see, we're now back to using the light mode. So we can pretty simply turn the dark mode back on. Something else that's really cool, and it helps me a lot if you would start querying for posts again. So this is a GraphQL API that allows you to query for posts. We do get posts again. And then we can see, give me the ID and the title of all the posts. I can run this query, it's all fine. And sometimes what I like to do with GraphiQL 1 is run a specific query. What I would do, I would copy paste this. I would comment this out. And I would make a query to get an individual post like this. I would say ID is value. I have a value here, which is 1. Let me copy it, put it in there. And then render the ID and the title for me. So this is something I would do all the time when using GraphiQL 1. Because in GraphiQL 1, there's one missing feature, which is make it possible to use tabs. So surprise, surprise, GraphiQL 2 actually has this feature to use tabs. So I can now just create a new tab. So what I would do, I would uncomment this. And as you can see, it says untitled here. What I need to do is type down query, get posts, and it will take the name of my query as the name of the tab. I actually have to make this get posts like this. So this will be the name of my new tab. And I can execute this and I can find all the IDs. And then if I would be going to my new tab, I can copy paste this and turn this into get post by ID. So this will be my new tab that gets an individual post. So if I would like a new one to get posts to, I can just copy paste this, head over here, add this new value in there, clean it up a little, maybe use Prettify, and like this, Prettify this code for me please, and then I can get a new value of a post just by using its ID. So tabs are very useful in GraphiQL 2. Besides having the dark mode, of course, which makes everything look so much prettier. So not all improvements to GraphiQL 2 are visible by the eye. The team actually made major updates to the codebase, and it has been unmaintained for years and years. With GraphiQL 2, it's become way easier to create your own extensions on top of GraphiQL, which maybe I will be covering in another video. So if you'd like to see more content on GraphiQL, please leave a comment and let me know what you'd like to see in a new version of GraphiQL, and maybe I can start building a plugin in one of my next videos. Also, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because that way you will be updated when a new video drops.